What's going on, everybody? It's Neil from 2AF. Man, we just had Kyle out here for a pistol class, and we're going to do another gun history video this time about the Recce gun. Man, Kyle, tell me a little bit about, like, when's the first time you saw this, or...
So, this setup like this, this is what we would have called a Recce M4. Some guys would call it a sniper M4. That was just the slang term that the guys would use. This came about, I would call it mid-90s, maybe a little bit late 90s, so like 95, 96, 97, somewhere in there. I don't know, I can't remember the exact year. But this was probably the most common variant of this that we would use. And really, where it came from, you got to understand the backside of it. Before this, what we had was a fixed carrying handle Colt, and guys were mounting scopes on top of a fixed carrying handle. That would have been a normal barrel profile with like the fixed front sight post, that's the gas block, and you know, a 16-inch barrel. From, you know, obviously that was, you know, guys are making that because they wanted a scoped AR. So the problem with that, because the scope would be so high mounted on top of a fixed carrying handle, is guys were having to build up the cheek weld. So back then in them days, they're taking PT pad, duct taping it on, making it work. I've posted a few photos of that, some of the history of it. A lot of the guys in Somalia, that's what they were using. Around that time, one of the guys that was in Somalia actually had a gun that was a fixed carrying handle, and it was the first model where the armorers at the command cut the carrying handle down, took a piece of rail that was like off of a Remington 700, drilled and tapped the top, and put that piece of rail on there. So if you think about that and how, you know, that could turn really bad, right? Because drilling and tapping that, you're going into, you know, where the charging handle moves. So this was very experimental at the time. They took the same Leopold 3-9 with just rings, like you see something like this here, and they mounted it on there. And that's where they started talking about getting rid of the clamshell, that 7-inch clamshell. The first thing they went to, from my memory, would have been a PRI foregrip, which was a long plastic tube. And the PRI foregrip was good. The problem with that is us mounting flashlights and lasers onto it, it was never really that solid. So that was a home-built, if you will, variant of a scoped AR. And then from there, once we got the rail systems that would pop in like this one does here, we were able to get a real rail system that we could mount the lasers and the flashlights and bipod, if you wanted it, on there. And this became probably the most popular version, especially in the early part of the war, you know, through the late 90s and the early part of the GWAT. The reason for that is this ended up being a lot lighter than the quote-unquote Mark 12. From this, the Mark 12 got developed, but the problem with the Mark 12 to a lot of us was that you had a fixed buttstock. None of us liked that, and that was more of a storage thing than anything else, getting in and out of a bird or a truck or whatever. You didn't have the ability to collapse the buttstock. The other thing we didn't like was that the barrel started getting longer. We really never saw any big ballistic advantage to go into an 18-inch. We kind of liked keeping everything at 16. And most guys really never ran with a Mark 12, and if they did, I would say all the guys that I rolled with, they would at a minimum take the Mark 12 and replace the fixed buttstock with a collapsible buttstock. But I would say this setup more than anything is what we rolled with most of the time. So by the late 90s, we got in with Night Force with a 2.5 to 10, like you see here. By far the most popular scope that we ran back then. And you know, as far as the 10 power goes, as far as I know to this day, it's probably the lightest and the shortest 10 power scope that there is. Now, we didn't run red dots on them because we didn't have red dots back then. So you take this away, and that's really what you ended up with. The barrel, made by Elijah, that was the first iterations, and it was a match grade barrel, shooting 77 grain back then, and you know, that was stolen from Army marksmanship unit. We just had the manufacturer switch that over from a ballistic tip to an open tip match round. But yeah, this gun here, this is kind of like, I mean, it brings back a lot of memories. And like I said, most guys would pick something like this over a true Mark 12 just because of weight and a little bit of the design characteristics that make it easier to carry.
So with the 16 or 16.5 inch barrel or whatever it is, I mean, how you're comfortable shooting to about out where with something like this in a 5.56?
Well, with the match grade 77 and a stainless steel barrel, you know, we called it a 600-yard gun all day. That was not a problem. And honestly, I mean, bipoded up, you know, 800 is not, that's not an uncommon thing. But you got to, when you talk about that, you do have to talk about target size. So what I would say is, if you want to talk about BC steel, like the A zone and the C zone of USPSA, because, you know, when you talk about the body piece of that, just ignore the head part. If you're talking about the BC steel, which is going to be considered a pretty accurate kill shot, I would say 600 is pretty much a gimme with a guy who's got some training under his belt, knows how to call wind, all that kind of shit. 800 is going to get probably a little bit, percentages are going to go down, and you're going to depend on wind. But I would call it a 600-yard gun all day. And then past that, you might pick a bigger gun? Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, a lot of it was region dependent, because it depended, you know, if you look at an open area where you've got just long, flat areas, most guys are going to go to a 30 cal because, you know, you're probably starting the party a little bit further than you'd be comfortable with this. So I would say terrain more than anything dictated caliber, but by far throughout the military in the war, the scope 5.56 was the #1 quote-unquote sniper rifle, because you could carry a lot of bullets. You're typically not shooting really past 3 or 4. The ammo's interchangeable with anybody else that you're around. You know, in specialty cases though, you know, going to the 30 cals, whether at that time SR-25, 308, or if it was a bolt gun type situation, you know, 300 Win Mag.
And you hear people talk about the scopes pretty often. People that I know who have used a scope like that seem to really love it, and then you'll find some other people who don't like it because it has a tighter eye box. Was the draw to it mostly the size and the weight? Yeah, the draw was size and weight. And again, when you look at mid to late 90s, there were not a lot of options. Yeah. This was the best option for the gun. In my opinion, back then, it was the only scope that fit the gun. Yeah. Now, that's not the case anymore. I mean, you know, nowadays, I would say a more modern version of this that I would say is going to be way easier for you to work would be like a Night Force, like an ATACR 1-8, or a Night Force NX8 with the FC DMX reticle. That's a better reticle. You've got true 1 power. You can go down a red dot and run it just like, you know, a soldier or an assaulter does, you know, like an aim point or an EOTech. But back then, that was, we did not have a lot of options. So, yeah. So that was kind of the pick because it fit the gun. Well, that's all I got for you, man. Anything else about the Recce? No, man, they're scoped ARs, man. That's the way to go. All right, thanks so much. Yeah. Quick wrap up to the video. I wanted to thank Kyle for taking a few minutes before he had a long road trip after the pistol class we did for helping us to do this. We'll see you next month for carbine class. In any case, from front to back, we'll go over what we got here. Knight's Armament NT4 mount on a 16-inch Lilja barrel. I've heard some people say these are 16.5. I really don't know. Honestly, it looks longer than 16 to me. That's why I believe 16.5. I'll probably try and get out there and measure it at some point. This one has a little bit of a bead blast finish because when I got it, I got this barrel back in like 2005, 2004 time frame. The whole gun was painted kind of like, I don't know if you can see that tan color that's in there on that gas block. The whole gun was painted like that, and I kind of wanted it more black, so eventually I got the barrel bead blasted. Most of the barrels would probably have just the regular stainless shiny finish. In any case, talking about that gas block, carbine length gas system. Mid-length gas systems were not a thing back then. You heard Kyle talk about how these guns kind of started in the mid to late 90s going into the early 2000s. Mid-length gas systems didn't really start showing up until, you know, probably a decade or more later. So these early guns would have had carbine length gas systems even on these 16-inch barrels. 12-inch Knights Armament free float RAS. Some of the guns I've seen would have used the 9-inch. Some of them used the 12-inch. I put the 12 on this. I would prefer that greatly on a gun this size. Night Force 2.5 to 10 by 24 in Night Force 1.5-inch ultralight rings. I have seen and heard some people used lower rings on these, but I really wanted to use the 1.5-inch high ones because that's going to put my eye right behind the scope when I have a good cheek weld. I don't really have to scrunch down really hard. I don't have to lift my head up to use those rings. Doctor optic up here. I use the Aggravate reproduction mount. I never really had one of the Wilcox ones. By the time I saw them being used, they were pretty scarce and pretty expensive. If I ever ran across one for a reasonable price, I'd probably get it. In the meantime, I'm more than happy to use this Aggravate one for the Doctor up there. PRI gas buster charging handle, Young Manufacturing bolt with a bolt carrier with a standard Colt bolt. I have a Knights Armament upper and lower receiver on that. I know that's not really the right way to do it, but you know, the right receivers were never really my focus. I have some on some of my guns, but most of the time that's more of a coincidence because that's what I use to build it than anything else. CTR stock, I use that for to keep this gun kind of slim and light. For years, people said that, you know, the Recce was not a legit clone. It wasn't something that really even existed. That's because there really wasn't. It's not like a record gun or an MK style gun. It was just kind of something put together. Kyle kind of made reference to that in his video. Night Force eventually put out a video, a picture that showed a gun a lot like this that used the CTR stock. I was happy to use it, like I said, to keep this gun slim and light. Standard A2 grip. I do use an ambi safety on most of my guns. Knights Armament 2-stage trigger. And yeah, this little bipod stud that's down here, it's made from Knights Armament. It slips on right in between the gap that you will see, like that gap that's right there on the bottom of the mount. Little nut goes on the inside and you screw this lowest possible way to mount a bipod to these guns. It's pretty cool. So that's really all I got for you. We got Popcorn and PJ over here helping me out with the video today. We'll wrap it up. This is probably one of my favorite clones to shoot. It's the most like an M4. The Lilja barrel, super accurate. Mine is probably the most accurate one barrel I own. Friends of mine who have the Lilja barrels also say it's probably their most accurate barrel. So phenomenal barrels. Love shooting this gun because it's so accurate. It's got 10 power, but still it's pretty slim and pretty light. You can shoot it like a carbine. All right, it's Neil from 2AF. Thanks for watching the gun story, gun history video again. Be in touch any way you can. Neil at 2AF.com, 904-593-6922. You can call or text that number, or just be in touch on any of these social media platforms. I'm always happy to help. Head on over to 2AF.com, get yourself signed up for email notifications. It's always the best way to keep an idea of what's going on around the warehouse, what's coming into the warehouse, and what's going out to you guys from the warehouse. All right, everybody. See you later.